A kind waitress paid for an old man's coffee, never knowing he was a billionaire looking. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. It was early morning at the small diner on Maple Avenue, the kind that smelled of fresh coffee and buttered toast even before the doors opened. The neon sign outside flickered against the pale dawn light, and the few regulars sat in their usual seats, quiet, half asleep, waiting for caffeine to do its work. Behind the counter, Emma wiped down the last table before the breakfast rush. Her apron was faded, her sneakers thin from wear, but her smile was still there, soft and patient. She had been working double shifts for almost 6 months now, saving every dollar she could. Rent was due, her mother's medication needed refilling, and the tips from the night shift barely covered groceries. Still, every morning, Emma reminded herself, kindness costs nothing. The bell above the door jingled. An old man stepped inside, slow, careful with each step. His coat was too large, his hat pulled low, and his hands trembled slightly as he searched the pockets of his worn jacket. Emma greeted him with the same gentle warmth she offered everyone. "Good morning, sir. Coffee to start the day?" He nodded, his voice a low rasp. "Just coffee, please. Black." She poured the cup and placed it in front of him. The steam curled up between them, catching the golden light from the window. When he reached for his wallet, he paused, confusion flickering across his face. He searched again, patting his pockets, a hint of embarrassment tightening his mouth. I am sorry," he murmured, lowering his eyes. "I must have left my wallet at home." For a second, Emma hesitated. The register behind her showed $3.45 for a cup of coffee. It was not much, but to her, every coin mattered. Still, something about the way the man's shoulders hunched quiet, proud, yet defeated, made her chest ache. "It is all right," she said gently. "This one is on me." He looked up, startled. "No, I cannot let you." "You can," she interrupted with a smile. "Everyone deserves a good cup of coffee. Consider it a gift." The old man studied her face for a long moment, his pale blue eyes softening. Then, slowly, he lifted the cup to his lips. "Thank you," he said simply. But the way he said it carried a weight that stayed with her long after he left. When Emma returned to clear the counter, she found something small tucked under the empty cup, a wrinkled napkin with a single line written in neat handwriting. "Kindness always finds its way back." She folded the note carefully and slipped it into the pocket of her apron. She did not know why. But the words felt important, like a promise. Outside, the morning had brightened. Buses rumbled down the street, car horns echoed, and life carried on as usual. But Emma stood for a moment at the window, watching the old man disappear into the sunlight. She felt a quiet peace settle over her, unaware that this small act, buying a stranger a simple cup of coffee, was about to change her entire life. She turned back to her shift, humming softly as she refilled cups and wiped counters, unaware that the same man she had just helped was not who he seemed to be at all. The next morning began like every other day, but something inside Emma felt different. Maybe it was the small note she had tucked into her pocket, the one that said, "Kindness always finds its way back." She had read it again before leaving her tiny apartment, letting the words settle in her chest like a quiet promise. The city was waking up around her, buses grumbling down the narrow street, gray clouds pressing low over the rooftops. Her hands were cold as she locked the door, the metal key worn smooth from years of use. Emma's apartment was hardly more than a single room. The wallpaper peeled near the window, and the heater coughed more than it worked. On the nightstand sat a photo of her mother taken before the illness, smiling, healthy, holding a basket of apples from the farmer's market. Emma kept that picture close because it reminded her why she worked so hard. She caught the early bus, half asleep, watching rain beat against the glass. Around her, commuters scrolled through their phones, their faces pale from the fluorescent lights. She clutched her small backpack tighter. Inside were two things that mattered most: a half-empty notebook filled with her cafe designs and the folded napkin from yesterday. By the time she reached the diner, the breakfast rush had already begun. The bell chimed non-stop, coffee cups clattered, and the smell of bacon hung heavy in the air. Her manager, Mr. Jacobs, called out orders in his usual impatient rhythm. "Emma, table 3 needs refills. And someone clean that counter." "Yes, sir," she answered, forcing a smile as she hurried across the floor. The day dragged on in a blur of footsteps, spilled coffee, and tired smiles. Tips were smaller than usual. Her feet ached, and the clock seemed to move slower with every passing minute. When her shift finally ended, she counted her earnings barely $22 in crumpled bills and coins. Not even enough for groceries and bus fare combined. She thought about walking home again to save money, but the sky had already turned the color of ash. Wind bit through her thin jacket as she stepped outside. Halfway down the block, she paused at the pharmacy window. Inside, she could see the label of her mother's prescription through the glass. The refill price glared back at her like a number carved in stone. Too high. For a moment, her resolve cracked. She pressed her palm against the cold glass and whispered, "Please hold on, Mom. I will figure it out." Her stomach growled, reminding her she had skipped lunch. She walked toward the park, bought the cheapest sandwich from a food truck, and sat on a bench under the flickering streetlight. The bread was dry, the cheese stale, but it was food. She tore the sandwich in half and placed the other half in a paper bag. When a homeless man passed by, she called out softly, "Sir, would you like something to eat?" He looked at her in disbelief before taking the bag with trembling hands. "God bless you, miss," he murmured. Emma smiled faintly. "Take care." She stayed on that bench for a long while, watching the lights of passing cars blur in the drizzle. The city around her never slowed down. It did not notice people like her. People trying, quietly, to hold things together. Later, when she reached her apartment, her roommate Mia was gone. A note on the table read, "Could not wait anymore. Rent is overdue. Sorry." Emma sank onto the edge of her bed, the exhaustion finally breaking through. The sound of rain on the roof filled the silence. She took out the napkin from her apron pocket and unfolded it again. The ink was slightly smudged, but the words were still there, steady and sure. Kindness always finds its way back. She let out a shaky laugh, part sadness, part hope. "We will see about that," she whispered. The night deepened, and the hum of traffic faded. She lay down without turning on the heater, pulling the thin blanket to her chin. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, low and steady. Emma closed her eyes, unaware that the man she had helped yesterday, the quiet old man with trembling hands, was not at home or lost in the crowd. He was in the back seat of a black car, watching the rain fall on the city streets. In his hand was the same napkin with her handwriting on it. And as the car turned toward the bright skyline, his assistant asked, "Sir, should I cancel the morning meeting?" The man's voice was calm but thoughtful. "No," he said, "but tomorrow I want to visit that little diner again." He looked out the window, his reflection blending with the city lights, a faint smile on his face. "I believe I have just met someone extraordinary." Morning sunlight crept through the blinds of Emma's small apartment, cutting thin lines of gold across the cracked wall. She blinked awake to the muffled sound of city buses and distant horns. The air was cool, and her blanket had slipped halfway to the floor. Her stomach ached with hunger, but the clock read 6:30. Time to get up. She sat on the edge of the bed and reached for the napkin lying on the nightstand. The edges were crinkled now, but she traced the words again with her finger. Kindness always finds its way back. The memory of the old man's gentle smile still lingered. It had been 2 days since she last saw him. For some reason, she kept wondering who he was, where he went, and why those words felt like more than a polite gesture. Emma dressed quickly, tying her apron around her waist as she walked toward the diner. The streets glistened from last night's rain, the scent of wet pavement mixing with the faint aroma of coffee drifting from nearby shops. Inside, the morning rush had already begun. Mr. Jacobs was barking orders. A delivery driver dropped off boxes near the counter, and the bell above the door never stopped ringing. Emma smiled politely at each customer, refilled mugs, wiped spills, and tried not to think about the rent notice she had folded inside her apron pocket. Just before 8, the bell chimed again. She looked up and froze. Standing by the entrance was the same old man from 2 mornings ago. But something about him looked different now, his posture straighter, his eyes sharper. And his coat, though the same color, seemed new, crisp, expensive. He smiled as if nothing had changed. "Good morning, miss." Emma blinked, surprised but pleased. "You came back! I was not sure I would see you again." "I could not stay away," he said warmly, taking the same seat at the counter. "The coffee here tastes better than anywhere else." She laughed lightly. "That is generous. Most people just come for the free refills." The man chuckled. "Perhaps I am not most people." As she poured his coffee, he glanced around the diner. "You work here every day?" "Yes, every morning and some evenings. It keeps the lights on." "Do you enjoy it?" Emma hesitated. "It is work, but I have dreams beyond this place." He leaned slightly forward. "Dreams?" She blushed a little, wiping her hands on her apron. "I want to open my own cafe one day. A small place for people who cannot afford fancy restaurants but still want a warm meal and a kind smile. I even have designs in a notebook." His gaze softened. "That sounds beautiful. What is stopping you?" She smiled faintly. "Reality, rent, bills, life." He nodded, understanding. Sometimes reality needs a little push. Before she could ask what he meant, a customer called her name. She excused herself and hurried away. When she returned, his cup was empty, and the seat was vacant once again. But something was left behind. Under the saucer lay a small envelope. Inside was the same napkin she had given him, her handwriting still visible. But now, beneath her words, another line had been added in precise cursive. "Kindness deserves a chance to grow. Keep believing." Her heart skipped. On the back of the napkin, a small business card was tucked neatly. It read, "David Carter, Carter Foundation." Emma's breath caught. She had seen that name before, printed on donation boxes at hospitals, on flyers for community scholarships, even on the evening news. The Carter Foundation funded housing programs, schools, and local businesses. She looked toward the window, but he was already gone, lost in the crowd outside. For a long moment, she stood frozen, the card trembling in her hand. Later that night, Emma sat at her kitchen table, the card beside her notebook. Her mother coughed softly from the next room. The rent notice stared at her from the wall. She closed her eyes, replaying the man's words. Sometimes reality needs a little push. Was he offering her one? Or was this just another coincidence, a fleeting moment of hope meant to fade by morning? But the next morning, when Emma arrived at the diner, a black sedan was parked outside. The same man stepped out, this time dressed in a tailored suit that left no doubt about who he truly was. He smiled at her surprise. "Miss Emma," he said, his tone calm but firm, "I think we should talk." "Oh." She stood frozen on the sidewalk, her apron still tied, her mind spinning between disbelief and curiosity. "Talk about what?" she managed to ask. He glanced at the small coffee shop sign behind her, then back at her. "About kindness," he said softly, "and what it can build when given the right chance." For the first time in weeks, Emma felt the faint flicker of something she thought she had lost hope. She had no idea yet that this conversation would open the door to a world far beyond the diner, one that would test everything she believed about trust, dignity, and love. Emma could hardly believe her eyes. The man who had once worn a wrinkled coat and trembling hands now stood before her like someone out of a magazine. His silver hair was neatly combed, his shoes gleamed, and his voice carried a quiet authority that filled the morning air. "I am sorry for the surprise," he said gently. "I am not who you think I am. My name is David Carter, and I am the founder of the Carter Foundation." The name hung between them, too large for Emma to process. She had seen it before on donation plaques at hospitals, on scholarship brochures at the community center, and on news interviews about philanthropy. She blinked, still gripping her apron. "I do not understand. Why come here? Why pretend?" David's expression softened, because sometimes the only way to see true kindness is to meet it where it lives. "I spent months visiting places like this, quietly observing how people treat strangers. And then I met you." Her heart pounded in her chest. "I just bought you a cup of coffee," he smiled. "You gave more than that. You gave dignity. You saw someone struggling and you helped without asking for anything. That is rare." Emma swallowed, unsure what to say. The city noise buzzed faintly behind them, horns and footsteps blending into the background. David reached into his jacket and handed her a small folder. Inside is my card and an invitation. The Carter Foundation is starting a new program called Open Hands. It is a community initiative that helps local cafes provide meals for those in need. I want you to join us, Miss Emma. You have the heart for it. She hesitated, staring at the folder. The letters gleamed in gold across the top. I do not have a degree, she said quietly. I am not qualified for anything like that. You have compassion, he replied. That is qualification enough. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened the folder. Inside was a formal invitation with her name printed clearly. It felt unreal, like a dream too fragile to touch. Think about it, he said kindly. If you agree, there will be a car waiting for you tomorrow morning. The address and time are inside. Oh, then, without waiting for a reply, he stepped back into the car. The door closed with a quiet click, and within moments, the black sedan disappeared into traffic, leaving Emma standing on the sidewalk with her heart racing. That night, she sat at the kitchen table again, the invitation spread open in front of her. Her mother's cough echoed faintly from the bedroom. Bills were stacked in uneven piles beside the salt shaker. She traced the letters of her name, wondering if she was foolish to even consider it. Her friend Mia, who had come back to pick up some things, glanced at the paper. You think this is real? I do not know, Emma admitted. Maybe it is a mistake. Or maybe, Mia said softly, it is the beginning of something better. Emma stayed awake long after Mia left, watching the city lights flicker through the cracked window. She thought about David Carter's eyes, steady, sincere, curious. There had been no arrogance, no pity, only a strange kind of respect. By dawn, her decision was made. She folded the invitation, pressed it to her chest, and whispered to herself, if kindness finds its way back, maybe this is how. The next morning, at precisely 8 o'clock, the same black car pulled up in front of her building. The driver stepped out and opened the door. Miss Emma Brooks? He asked. She nodded, clutching her small bag. Yes. Mr. Carter is expecting you. Oh, as the car glided through the city streets, Emma stared out the window. The diner faded from view, replaced by tall glass buildings gleaming in the sunlight. Her heart fluttered with equal parts fear and wonder. When they stopped in front of the Carter Foundation headquarters, a sleek tower of steel and light, she took a deep breath. For the first time, she was not serving coffee. She was stepping into something unknown, something that might just change the course of her life forever. The lobby of the Carter Foundation felt like another world. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, spilling across polished marble floors. Employees in suits moved briskly, their shoes clicking in precise rhythm. Emma clutched her small bag tighter, feeling completely out of place in her plain skirt and worn shoes. A receptionist greeted her kindly and led her to an elevator lined with mirrors. Her reflection looked nervous but determined. When the doors opened, she stepped into a wide conference room overlooking the city. At the far end stood David Carter, speaking quietly with two board members. He turned as she entered. Emma, you came, he said, smiling. Welcome. Thank you, Mr. Carter, she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. He gestured for her to sit. Please, call me David. This is not an interview. Think of it as a conversation. As she sat across from him, he handed her a folder filled with charts and photos. This is Open Hands. We are launching it in partnership with local diners and community cafes. You will help coordinate volunteers and design spaces that make people feel safe and valued. You know what that looks like better than anyone. Emma looked through the pages, recognizing faces of struggling families and small cafes, much like the one where she worked. You want me to help build this? Yes, he said simply. You showed me what kindness looks like in action. Now I want others to learn it too. Her throat tightened. I do not know if I can handle something this big. He leaned forward slightly. You do not have to handle it alone. His reassurance warmed her more than she expected. For the first time in months, someone believed she was capable of more than surviving. Over the next weeks, Emma threw herself into the work. She helped map out cafe partnerships, organized training sessions, and spoke with families who had lost their jobs. Every evening she returned home, exhausted but proud. The foundation staff admired her dedication, though some whispered behind her back, wondering why the billionaire seemed to spend so much time in her section. David often visited the workrooms, quietly watching her talk with volunteers. He noticed the way she encouraged shy interns, how she bent down to listen to elderly participants instead of talking over them. One evening, after the last meeting ended, he found her alone in the conference room, sorting donation forms by hand. "You should go home, Emma," he said softly. "You have done enough for today." She looked up, smiling faintly. "There is always more to do." He walked closer, his tone gentle. "You remind me of someone I used to know. My mother ran a small diner when I was a boy. She believed kindness could build a community. You make me believe it again." The honesty in his words caught her off guard. "That is the best compliment I have ever received," she whispered. Outside the tall windows, the city lights shimmered like scattered stars. For a brief moment, the space between them felt smaller, two people from different worlds connected by something simple and real. But as Emma gathered her things to leave, a shadow crossed her thoughts. The whispers among the staff, the sideways glances, the uneasy feeling that she might not belong here, they all came rushing back. She forced a smile and said goodnight, unaware that the very kindness drawing David closer was already stirring jealousy in others. And somewhere deep inside the foundation's bright walls, a story of gratitude was slowly turning into one of doubt and complication. The following weeks at the Carter Foundation were a blur of long hours, endless emails, and late-night planning sessions. The Open Hands project was expanding faster than anyone expected, and Emma was at the heart of it. Cafes across the city were signing on, and hundreds of volunteers were joining their efforts. But success came with pressure. Every day, new challenges appeared: budget shortages, delayed deliveries, miscommunication between teams. Emma worked tirelessly to keep everything running. Her kindness made her popular with most of the staff, but not everyone saw her that way. Some whispered that she was David Carter's favorite. Others hinted she had taken advantage of his sympathy. One morning, as she entered the office with coffee cups for her team, she overheard two employees near the elevator. "She used to be a waitress," one woman said. "Now she sits in board meetings like she owns the place." The other laughed quietly. "People like her do not belong here. Let us see how long this lasts." Emma stood frozen for a second, the warmth of the coffee fading against her skin. She said nothing, just walked away, her heart heavy. Later that afternoon, she met with David to discuss the upcoming launch event for Open Hands. He noticed her distracted look. "Something is wrong," he said. Emma shook her head. "It is nothing, just a long day." He studied her for a moment, then said softly, "You cannot help others if you forget to take care of yourself." She smiled politely. "I will be fine." David leaned back in his chair. "You know, when I first met you, I thought I was teaching you about generosity. Now I realize you have been teaching me." Her eyes met his, and for a brief moment the air between them changed. There was something unspoken there, something fragile but real. But the fragile peace did not last. The next morning, Emma received an anonymous email with a link to an online article. The headline read, "Billionaire David Carter hires waitress for foundation role. Rumors of personal relationship spark controversy." Her breath caught. The article was cruel, filled with half-truths and insinuations. It described her as an opportunist who had caught the billionaire's eye and questioned her qualifications. Dozens of comments followed, mocking her and her past. Her hands trembled as she shut her laptop. She could not face the office. Instead, she sat by the window of her small apartment, watching rain fall in silver lines across the glass. Every word from that article echoed in her head. When her phone rang, she saw David's name but could not answer. Shame pressed too heavy on her chest. What would he think? What would everyone think? By the time evening came, she had made a decision. She packed the few papers she had brought home and wrote a short letter on plain stationery. "I am grateful for everything the foundation has given me, but I cannot stay where I am no longer respected. Please understand, Emma Brooks." She sealed the letter, placed her staff badge on top of it, and left it on her desk at the foundation the next morning before sunrise. As she walked out of the building, The first light of dawn touched the city skyline. Her reflection in the glass doors looked calm, but her heart was breaking. She whispered to herself, "Kindness may find its way back, but maybe not to me." She turned away from the tower of glass and steel, stepping back into the crowded streets where she once belonged, unaware that David Carter had arrived minutes later, finding her letter, reading it in silence, and realizing just how much he stood to lose. David Carter stood in his office long after everyone had gone home. The folded letter sat on his desk, the handwriting small and careful. He read it once, then again, unable to believe she was gone. Outside the tall windows, the city glowed with endless light, but inside the room, everything felt dim. He could still hear her voice in his memory, calm and sincere. Everyone deserves a good cup of coffee. He had built his entire foundation on that same belief: kindness, dignity, hope. And yet, he had let her walk away without fighting for her. The next morning, the board of directors gathered to discuss the article that had caused the uproar. Cameras waited outside the building. Investors wanted statements. A public relations officer suggested releasing a formal denial. David listened quietly before saying, "There will be no denial, there will be truth." The room fell silent. He continued, "Miss Emma Brooks worked harder than anyone here. The Open Hands Project exists because of her. If people choose to twist kindness into scandal, that speaks more about them than about her." A board member frowned. "David, you are risking your reputation." He met their eyes without hesitation. "Then it is a risk worth taking." After the meeting, he left the building, ignoring the flashing cameras and shouted questions. His driver tried to follow, but David waved him off and walked through the busy streets instead. The cold air bit against his face, but it felt grounding. He needed to find her. Meanwhile, across the city, Emma sat in the corner of a small library, surrounded by her sketches and the remains of a half-eaten sandwich. She had been looking for new work but found little more than polite rejections. Each email began with, "Thank you for applying," and ended with, "Unfortunately, we have chosen another candidate." Her savings were nearly gone. She had sold her phone to pay for her mother's medication. Every day felt heavier than the last. When she closed her notebook, a voice startled her. "Miss Brooks?" She looked up to see a woman in a navy coat holding an envelope. "Mr. Carter asked me to give you this. He said it was important." Emma's breath caught. The envelope bore the foundation's seal. Inside was a handwritten note. "You once said kindness deserves a chance to grow. I believe that too. Please meet me tomorrow at the Lighthouse Cafe, the one we plan to open together. It is ready, David." Her hands shook as she reread the words. The Lighthouse Cafe. That had been her dream, just drawings in her notebook. How could it be ready? The next day, she followed the address written at the bottom of the note. The taxi stopped in front of a small building on River Street. A simple sign hung above the door, the Lighthouse Cafe. Warm light spilled from the windows. Inside, volunteers were serving coffee and warm meals to people who looked tired but grateful. At the center of the room stood David, wearing a plain gray sweater instead of a suit. He smiled when he saw her. "You built this?" she whispered. "No," he said softly. "We did. You inspired it." Tears welled in her eyes. "Why would you do this for me after everything?" "Because truth does not need defending," he said. "It needs action." In that moment, the noise of the cafe faded, replaced by the quiet hum of hope returning. For the first time since she left, Emma felt seen again, not as a waitress, not as a rumor, but as the woman whose kindness had changed everything. Emma stood in the middle of the Lighthouse Cafe, surrounded by the hum of voices and the aroma of fresh bread. The warmth of the place wrapped around her like sunlight after a long storm. Every detail felt familiar: soft yellow walls, secondhand tables, small vases with wildflowers. It was exactly how she had imagined it in her notebook, down to the sign above the counter that read, "A meal shared is a promise kept." She turned to David, still unable to believe what she was seeing. "You made this real," she said softly. He smiled. "You made it possible. I just gave it a roof." Volunteers bustled behind them, preparing lunch for the community. People from all walks of life, elderly couples, workers, families, sat together at long wooden tables. There were no prices on the menu, only a sign that said, "Pay what you can." Emma felt tears burn her eyes. They are all eating for free? For dignity, David corrected gently. You taught me that difference. She watched a young mother hand her child a plate of soup, their smiles bright against the gray afternoon outside. For the first time in months, Emma's heart felt whole again. After you left, David continued, the board wanted to shut down the Open Hands project. They said the scandal ruined its reputation. So I stepped down as director and used my own money to build this instead. Kindness deserves to live beyond business. She stared at him, speechless. You stepped down? You gave up everything? He shook his head. Not everything. The foundation will survive without my name. But this place needed both of us. Emma laughed through her tears. You are impossible. He smiled. That quiet, knowing smile she remembered from the diner. And you are remarkable. A silence settled between them, soft but full. Then she asked, Why tell me all this now? Because I owe you honesty, he said. When I first met you, I was testing people, trying to prove that kindness could be measured. But you showed me it cannot. It must be lived. I lied by omission, and I regret that. She studied his face, seeing not the billionaire from television, but the same man who once sat at her counter, grateful for a cup of coffee. I was angry, she admitted. Not because you were rich, but because I thought I was just an experiment. You never were, he said quietly. You were the answer. The words settled between them, heavy and tender. A volunteer approached, asking if Emma could help hand out pastries. She nodded and turned to help, her movement steady, her heart lighter. As she worked beside David, passing out warm bread and smiles, she realized something simple but powerful. Forgiveness was also an act of kindness. By the time the cafe closed that evening, the city outside had turned golden. The last guest left with a full stomach and a warmer heart. David helped her stack the chairs, his sleeves rolled up, his hands dusted with flour. When everything was quiet again, he said softly, You once gave me a cup of coffee when I could not pay. I would like to return that gesture. He poured 2 cups from the pot on the counter, handed one to her, and raised his own, to kindness finding its way back. Emma met his gaze, a smile curving through her tears. And to second chances, they drank in silence, surrounded by the gentle glow of their shared creation, a place born from pain, faith, and the simple truth that kindness, when given freely, always finds its way home. The grand opening of the Lighthouse Cafe came 1 month later. A gentle spring breeze carried the smell of baked bread through River Street. Balloons lined the doorway, and a small crowd gathered outside neighbors, volunteers, and people who had once come there for a free meal. The cafe had become more than a place to eat. It was a symbol of community, a reminder that kindness could build something lasting. Emma stood by the entrance, adjusting the flowers on the counter. Her hands still trembled a little from excitement. The soft hum of laughter filled the air. Reporters were waiting near the sidewalk, but for once, she was not afraid of them. She was proud. Every headline that had once torn her down had been replaced by new ones that read, From Waitress to Founder, the woman who built kindness into action. David arrived a few minutes later, dressed simply, no bodyguards, no entourage. The crowd quieted as he stepped forward to speak. When I first met Emma, he began, she bought me a cup of coffee. It was a small act, but it changed everything I understood about humanity. This cafe stands as proof that one good deed can echo further than we imagine. Kindness is not charity. It is equality. Applause rippled through the crowd. Emma's eyes glistened as she looked at him. When the speech ended, he turned to her with a smile. I think there is one last thing to make this official, he said softly. From his pocket, he pulled out a small object wrapped in the same napkin she had given him long ago. He unwrapped it slowly, revealing a simple silver ring engraved with the words, $4.75. Her breath caught. You kept that? I never forgot it, he said. It reminded me that the richest moments in life are the ones money cannot buy. The cafe fell silent as he took her hand. Emma Brooks, you taught me that leadership is not measured in wealth, but in compassion. You showed me that love is not born from status, but from sincerity. Will you let me spend my life proving that to you? Tears slipped down her cheeks, but her smile was radiant. Yes, she whispered. 1,000 times, yes. The crowd erupted in applause. The volunteers cheered, and even the cameras captured what words could not fully express the quiet, luminous beauty of two souls who had found each other through kindness. As the sun dipped behind the buildings, the golden light filled the cafe. The sign above the counter shimmered, its message glowing against the glass. A meal shared is a promise kept. Emma and David stood side by side, watching the room overflow with laughter and life. The story that began with a single cup of coffee had come full circle. Proof that kindness, once given, always finds its way back.